When looking back on Disney characters, the most memorable of the bunch would of course be their collection of princesses, the charming regal or adventurous females that truly make the story stand out on their own for young and old and boy and girl. And while I've tried to focus on the broader aspects of heroes and villains showcasing my favorites and least favorites, I still can't deny their impact of what Disney princesses bring to Disney storytelling. So with that knowledge today, I finally gave in and decided it was officially time to rank these Disney princesses and see who characters I relate to the most and enjoy the most too. I mean, technically I already spoiled some of it considering I covered most Disney heroes in that ranking video, but this is going to be more different, covering these characters that weren't exactly the main in that weird definition of what Disney likes to brand as princesses or whatnot. And then speaking of that, I have to put some exceptions to the rule where we have these definitions for princesses to sell as merchandise by the company even when some of these characters are not royalty and all for their entire story. For example, recent characters like Asha have already been shown to not be a princess or even told to be such in her story, unless Disney decides to change that in the future for branding purposes, where she will not be included in this list at this time. I also decided to disclude Mulan for more obvious reasons, as I've already did some of these princesses in my hero video and the fact that she isn't actually a princess at all, a warrior hero who saves China and only marries a general in that very universe, not even connected to the emperor at all, where it just doesn't make any sense to do so why she's actually included other than the fact of merchandise itself. I am sadly also not including Merida despite being also in the lineup of princesses because of the fact it's Pixar and want to do a separate video on Pixar heroes where I just feel awkward about including that in a list that is compromising of characters from Walt Disney Animation and then this one exception from Pixar Animation, where basically it's just no set of heroes or other studio heroes for that matter that don't really relate to the prime rulers of their very lands. Where yes, that even means I will feature Moana in this video despite me not agreeing with Disney's or Maui's definition of her being a princess, while also still agreeing with Moana herself declaring her as the daughter of the chief in that regard. And with that finally out of the way too, this list will be different from my previous hero rankings because it does focuses on each character as princesses and what I think about them compared to them individually as main characters of the film in that separate regard. So if it seems different than that list of what I said earlier, then you can probably understand it. But with that all out of the way and what will be featured on this list, I hope you will be able to accept those terms as we begin right now. Now, this was a really hard decision to make considering my other videos on these characters and their very films. But when you look at it from a princess perspective, then it probably is a no-brainer to be frank. Because the fact still remains, for at least the runtime in the film story and not to do with the world itself, is that Elsa actually spends more time as a queen rather than a princess. Now I know that's the least important thing and most irrelevant thing when it comes to ranking such characters, but I'm just considering what has been done to show her as a character in that regard. When that's obvious thinking of how I say she's a bad character in that regard to being shaped as a bad guy, a villain in the original story but also moved on because they wanted to have her have such sympathetic and more relatable traits. And while I can understand all of those points and what people say that relate to her character, most of the progression in later stories and what was shaped by her parents is just something I really hate. Elsa is just one of those characters that had something but never actually has the time to really show it. And again, the second film is more of her own as the main character of the film, and that's what I'm basing most of this experience a lot, where a lot of the actions she takes are pretty stupid and not well explained within her duties as queen when she only had for like 3 years at that very point. Something I still want to blame the majority on her own parents, who are one of my least favorite Disney characters of all time, or just animated parents in general. They aren't bad people, but they just do bad things in the growth of their own daughter and princess who is in line to become the queen if they get caught up in something. The gift that they had from bridging the two worlds or whatever they were doing together, which actually failed in the first film with what happened that almost destroyed Arendelle, and then again when they were understanding what the spirits wanted, which somehow meant that she would be a part of them yet again by abandoning her sister and then saving what was supposed to be destroyed. Everything about this isn't really well written to be honest in my opinion, because nothing about it actually gives her actions any weight. I can't agree with any of her decisions because it lacks that greater context or the ones that were set up just so poor in its execution that ruins the whole heart of where they were going for. But then again, keep in mind, I really don't hate Elsa because I used to have a crush on her when I was very young, but also I just hate what was written and what has become of her character being one of the most popular Disney has to offer now, which sadly does not excuse any of the confusing actions she takes in any of the films in my opinion. The journey that they grew in from that gets ruined in one form or another. And for that reason, I really just have to put her last on this list, and I don't really want to talk much more about her at this point than what I've already have, until the sequels come out of course. Raya is a character that infuriates me for one I thought had so much potential in a film that actually looked good on paper, but then executed its message in the most terrible way possible. Because for the most part, it is a good thing that she is a headstrong warrior who has this jaded personality that makes her distrust people she comes into contact with at any point at all, which is something I appreciate for newer Disney heroes going away from the streamlined princesses who were all quirky, but then again was also ruined in that part with the trust issues and these comedic quips that went into overtime that are dribbled back and forth. I just really don't feel like there's much growth for her as a character because it sort of forces her to start trusting people that are not even worthy of such trust at all, especially being weakened by the annoying Sisu who guides her to go blindly into these situations despite showing the consequence that actually makes Raya right at certain moments. Like most say, everything in this film could have worked as a series rather than a film, which is a very interesting idea to take for Walt Disney Animation considering Disney Plus is actually there, but they just chose to go this route for a movie that wasn't actually bad either with its overall concept, but yet again added no meaning for Raya's journey as a character and the princess of Kumandra's heartland, because the movie constantly reminds us that most of the blame is also shared with Raya herself, starting with the beginning of the film and at the end of the film, causing us to learn absolutely nothing for her development in her life from her very first steps. There is just no real middle ground for her to actually learn in any way to trust, where it just wants to take us from one extreme to the next. Either way, too much trusting or just don't trust at all. And when you look at that, you never really open up the possibility for someone to actually grow as a character, especially someone who's a princess who is already in a huge position within the kingdom or their tribe, making the villain not even a villain, but also someone who's just a misunderstood character who wanted to do the best for her people instead of everyone else's. Nobody actually trusted her until she managed to manipulate Raya at the very end of the film that she was actually to share the blame for Sisu's death as well, where they all decided to give her the gem in that place, which just very hurts their characters. It just really hurts to have someone like Raya introduced as a new breed of princess in modern Disney, but then to have some of those parts thrown away because of the poorly written message of the movie. I mean, if you like her, that's fine. I enjoy Kelly Mary Tran's performance in that regard too, but I just can't deny the excuse of a story that surrounded her as a character in that regard. The Black Cauldron remains to be the biggest mess in the history of Disney that almost broke the entire studio, and is also held up as an underrated classic by some today. And while I share some of those sentiments about the world's design, I unfortunately do not have any such for its characters, especially that of Princess Eilonwy, because like most of the movie that has been generally forgotten by modern Disney audiences, she herself is actually one of the more forgettable aspects of the film, to be honest, because she is supposed to be our main character Taran's love interest for the most part, whereas she really actually goes nowhere because of that, because of how insufferable Taran is as a character, literally one of the worst Disney heroes ever created. But this character, however, is just extremely boring to watch other than her introducing her name and berating Taran, which beside that, I still really can't think of anything important to actually say about her. This movie actually doesn't make it feel like she is actually a princess in that sense, where she comes from that isn't really elaborated on, and just more like a random girl who found our main hero and rescued him, and just that they fell in love by the end of the film. Like, the only thing you can really say about this is just how blatant the movie's problems are lined up by the older and young animators clashing together about what kind of movie it should be, especially with the newer executives that were coming in and so forth, who wanted to change the scenes so that children wouldn't be scared and the movie being less dark. Where she's just there for the sake of being there as the typical fairy tale type story, I guess, where I just put her this high because I've become more passionate about the previous two than she could ever be, where she really isn't the worst they have to offer because she really just doesn't do anything enough for me to actually care. It was just there and that's it, which is really disappointing in that aspect because Disney always has this tendency to scrub anything that isn't merchandisable or failed ultimately at the box office in that lineup, hence why Mulan is always included in the modern times, instead of actual princesses like her and a few others as we will see. Pocahontas is sadly another boring character in a boring film that Disney defies real history to sell as the peak of their greatest period of modern animation. I don't hate her either as a character and enjoy some of the moments she has interacting with nature and the songs to bring out the best of what she brings, but that's all dragged down by the true focus of the film, based on this fictional relationship she has with John Smith that is just so dull in all of its aspects compared to other Disney romances of the same period. But that being said, she still should be appreciated appreciated for what she had done for newer Disney characters in that same time period, represented in the colors of the wind being the best they have to offer, having this distinct connection to the world around her and understanding of what life is away from the short-sighted definitions of these two sides that is still celebrated today. But besides that whole point and sequence, it just really is boring to explore her character. I don't really feel like there's much emotion going on for her to show, and John Smith really just makes it generally worse than you might think looking at it. Looking at it more and more, and looking at who she was intended to marry in Coco Boy over here, who is just deemed too serious for her to be with and then dies for the sake of the climax of the story and the pointless love story that still goes nowhere because the sequel just has to be more realistic to the actual history of where she goes. The one where she goes with John Ralph, who is only slightly better than what we got here in the original story. And yeah, besides that, I really still can't think of anything else to say other than that her character is meh. Like, I'm really trying to find out more about her character, but that's how far as I could go to actually describe her in this video. It's just one of those not good but not bad types of situations, if you know what I mean. Princess Aurora is a character I wish got more time to be on screen, because she isn't really that bad for what has been shown, but that has been shown was very little, unless you are talking about the Enchanted Tales or whatever that was version, which shouldn't actually be acknowledged at all, mind you. But besides that, she still is very disappointing for her time, especially being the last princess supervised under Walt Disney himself, when they were coming out with new classics like Cinderella just before that really showed their growth as a studio in the realm of animated movies and characters from Snow White. And this is a film that truly has such love and care that defines what a fairy tale really looks like, which actually includes her in that regard, with her personality being kind, elegant, graceful, angelic, loving, and a gentle person, as well as a hopeless romantic. Like, when you see that throughout, you see that they wanted to improve upon her much as a character to have her own interests, but also just didn't have enough time to actually focus when they wanted to build the whole world around her. Like her fairy mothers and Prince Philip being the step up from the last two non-existent characters of Disney princes. But yeah, besides that, it's something that mainly exists for the sake of the plot rather than an actual fully realized character, which of course in that regard we should be grateful for expanded media on that part, except for the one I just mentioned at the beginning. I just wish there were way more development than just being the beauty for the sake of the film called Sleeping Beauty. But if you like that and you have more to add, that's fine and I actually appreciate, but this is just my own opinions of the princess in the entire film and what she does that isn't really a lot. Only 18 minutes of total screen time and 18 lines of dialogue in a film that is actually named after what her character does in the final act. Princess Vanellope is a very interesting character for two reasons. The first one being her character in the first film, and the second one is her character in the second film. One being good, and the other one being downright an awful degradation of such a character that was actually explored for in that matter. Because what they had originally with Ralph in the first film was pretty neat and goes against the grain of the typical Disney princesses we expect, for the fact we don't even know that she was a Disney princess until the very final part of the film being a part of the original Code of Games. And because of that, it allowed us to explore a different and unique type of relationship that they have that they wanted as characters that allowed them to grow as friends alongside their journey, where we see when they first greeted, she comes off as more annoying, obnoxious, and rude, with a bit of concern for the feelings and ambitions of other people in comparison to benefiting herself. However, these aspects of her character are just merely a result of her being bullied, trying to make her way back in the race as King Candy stole all of that away from her. That she does this to cope with the world around her and trying to do her best to actually fit back in. Because as we discover later on, Vanellope also lacks prejudice and looks beyond the definitions of what others like as a job as Ralph, being deemed as the bad guy by his peers and being shut out for who he truly wants to be, really knowing the good that is in his heart despite what he has to do day in and day out as his job, where she really helps Ralph learn what it actually means to be a hero at the end of the day, also shedding the fact that she was supposed to be the stereotypical princess by her dress that we see at the end, acting more as a regular racer to fit her game. But then again, these points get knocked down because of what actually happened to them in a horrible sequel that still exists because you know that Disney was going to be Disney, ruining our character alongside Ralph doing the most brain-dead stupid decisions from the very beginning to the very end. All of which was done now, so the fact that she could go turbo and abandon her game that she was a part of despite not being a part of it for a time like before, but just going to a new place for the sake of it that doesn't actually fit the way and world that she was built in the first place, and then butchering every other princess she goes on in Ralph Breaks the Internet that just makes quick jokes about some of them without realizing why they were like them in the first place. It's just this part that drags down what I like about each of these princesses for the better and worse, and why Vanellope has to take this spot because of those poorly thought out issues. If this movie had not exist, or they actually had to plan something better, then maybe she would have been ranked higher, but for now, she is fit right here before the top tier half of Disney princesses for that matter. Now for me, this is probably the most perfect balance on this list in terms of Disney's past and Disney's present, because no other film is more iconic to the entire industry than Snow White itself and what Walt Disney actually put in for the first feature-length animated movie. And while it is true that she isn't the most interesting character that they've ever created, you can also still appreciate the lengths that they actually went for developing her character in the first place and the world around her for such a time as 1937. This is where you have to keep in mind of what was produced at the time and why it actually hurts to hear what they're trying to do as a live action remake that understands nothing of what actually got them there in the first place. Because when you look at it, you just enjoy the simple attitude that is going around him and the charm that Snow White has in something that takes place in a short fairy tale story with her interaction between the 7 dwarfs and the happy ending she gets. Elements that are actually perfect as an introductory course in the magic of what animated movies can actually bring, especially for their very specific settings that take place hundreds of years before their time. Can't call this outdated if the book outdates itself way before it. But anyways, it's just great to see someone who is very nice and calm and also authoritative like a motherly figure at some points in the film, which is honestly a generally more interesting type of character that we should explore more of, having someone who's also simple but also having some of the layers too at a time where their greatest strengths was also her greatest flaws. For beyond all that, in those previous on this list and those after, and any other main character regardless, it's the true basis of why we love Disney characters to begin with and should be appreciated for those aspects more and more. You know, to be honest with you, I've always enjoyed Anna as a character, and being a princess in that aspect, she truly represents that sort of personality being locked away for so long, similar to that of Rapunzel. How she's more of a contrast to the colder personality of Elsa and having a warm design to her overall character to realize the good in others even if it doesn't show on the surface, like her match with Hans that seems similar than those who do not, like Kristoff and Elsa whom she loves as well. In terms of these qualities, I can see why she would actually be more relatable than Elsa is. Not that she isn't, like I've said many times already, but just coming from the perspective and personality that is also truthful as much as any other side. But just also disappointed in the second film for these portrayals where there could have been so much more to say after her development in the first and finding out what true love really is, with her persistence to go off her sister because she really loves her despite their parents stupidly shutting each other out. Like, she really does have the most development in this entire film from where they were and then learning to not marry people you just met because of the years of separation you experienced from the outside world and your own family in that part, to accepting the underlying problems others have with the concept of love that trumps everything else. The only major thing I wish that could have been better for her was her relationship with Kristoff, because I could see the built-up connection she and Hans actually had for a variety of reasons, but it really just didn't feel like much was there because the trolls did this one thing that Kristoff was actually against, and then again the entire love point was focused more on the sisters in the end, where it just could have been something more to get us to that point and make her realize that entire story. Because to be honest with you, Kristoff wasn't really an important character at all and was sidelined even more in the sequel. But beyond those points, I just think Anna is a good Disney princess for who she actually is. Princess Jasmine is just one of those princesses your family and especially siblings grew up loving. I mean, you can actually say that for any of them, but this is just a case of how she was for my sister being her favorite Disney princess and what she actually represented in the story in terms of love and so forth, being of course the first non-white Disney princess. Because she has such likable traits, being strong and independent, seeking to change things for her life while also respecting her father, who of course loves her. Where over the course of time and growing up sheltered, never being able to experience life, she grew more rebellious to the old laws keeping them there above their own people and treating her as an object rather than a human being with her own thoughts and feelings about life, which encourages her to sneak out for a day and find out what life is like for the common people they actually rule over and getting caught in the path of Aladdin at that very time, and how that actually shapes him to go after her heart, where we know her character has this such great disdain of other royals who actually comes in to attempt to get her love and shows off until proven otherwise. otherwise, showcasing how smart she is as a character despite her circumstances that she was raised under. This is also shown when she helps Aladdin defeat Jafar later on, acting a part seducing him and holding her own before she gets trapped. A level of strength you have to respect for what she wants in her life, taking risks in certain situations if it meant better things that are to come out of it. And for those reasons, we actually should appreciate the steps she took as a princess to be more progressive for the betterment of her society, and also having the right balance as that kind of character that doesn't actually take it too far to the point that is unrealistic to such circumstances and the strengths that are developed throughout. Princess Kida remains to be the most underrated Disney princess ever created, for the reasons of Disney's own selfish money-making marketable desires because of the fact Atlantis didn't do too good at the box office. Like seriously, if you watch Atlantis at all, you would actually understand how stupid it is that she isn't included in any of the new work or official Disney princess lists. Like how can you really do that with something that has such potential in its very story and characters like Kida herself? Because as we know, this is another character who actually becomes queen following her father's death just like Elsa, and takes on a greater role in the purpose of her own kingdom. I mean, yeah, just like the other stories, they could have actually had more time to develop, but the story itself with its numerous characters just makes the world feel more alive with the actions they took. The fact that she was a warrior princess growing up in such an advanced civilization that was almost lost to the world, having her mother taken from her to protect the city from ultimate destruction and living for thousands of years, just makes her one of the most unique we have ever seen at this point. One who really does care for her people's well-being and being intrigued by the outside world she never actually grew up knowing, taking interest in a nerdy linguist as that connection, falling in love with. Like that is such a very interesting dynamic between a warrior and a scrawny language nerd, piecing together two worlds that they never knew existed until this very point in time. That she has this personality that can come off as aggressive and violent to those unknown, but only does so to protect her people, where when we come to know her, she can actually be more kind and respectful with the duty to lead those she actually loves the most. The charm of her naivety to things she never experienced and the knowledge she does have is also a big plus. Like you can't really say much about these other princesses when she can actually speak a variety of different languages because of the root dialect that they are based on. These are all portions that should be given more attention because of how much they wanted to actually put and tell that made Atlantis such a great story, but one the company refuses to promote because of a sting of failures they had initially to make money off of, thinking what will happen in the future with Strange World and eventually Wish as time goes on, and they forget because of the fact that people refuse to see it in theaters. Tiana is one of those princesses whom I really admire for the direction they went for. The direction that is more aimed at the human side rather than the majority of the movie turning them into frogs. Because here you have someone who grew up with a normal family, having a loving mother and father who worked hard to make their lives better and their dreams come true, like owning their own restaurant that she and her father would actually oversee. And how she actually took that to heart to achieve such goals in her life, thinking in terms of the regular everyday experience a person has compared to that of a princess or a prince that she marries in the end. I know a lot of people are upset at this fact that the movie does some historical negationism in that era of the South, which also could have actually added such deeper context to her character if they show some of the relations at the time and root for her in that regard. But then again, this is of course a modern Disney movie where they try to mostly focus on the story itself, which is fine for the most part, except the disappointing fact that she is a frog for the most part, where they actually develop the most as characters. But beside that, with what they had still, she still is a great character who is still passionate about her goals and dreams, trying to go for the traditional route to actually reach that point, but also relaxing a bit to realize the other important things in life that actually comes to offer, like finding love and slowing down to appreciate the world around you. How it's more about being there for others rather than yourself, which is a message anyone can appreciate, and why she does achieve what she wants in the end, with the help of those she actually loves dearly. A simple, dedicated princess who goes above and beyond those who normally fit the billing. For me, Ariel is truly the pinnacle of all of modern Disney characters to date, with how The Little Mermaid kickstarted the Renaissance and the period of Disney princesses and animation we all love today. She is just one of those characters that combines the past of what we knew and introducing something that is present in our present. Because I think she is the cutest Disney princess by far, with her attitude of curiosity seeking to explore the human world. How she really doesn't mean to do any harm and just wants to explore what life is actually like on the surface despite what her father deems is evil to them. Doing things like missing the concert that she was supposed to be a part of, which she regrets, but also does just because she finds the human world to be more interesting. Actively going to places she shouldn't because she likes them rather than what is out of spite like others would actually do. How this movie again commits its changes around her father because she already actually does see something good in the minor things that we create in life. Like, why can this thing be bad if something wonderful can actually come from it? Which we discover is the truth from her perspective when she displays such curious emotions even without her voice. The animation here just really shines through that part, showcasing what her character is like beyond the acting itself. And she is just mostly a regular girl, just as anyone else who has their own interests and things beyond what we perceived as a select few being the human world as a whole, and finding love with Eric in that regard. Where such love actually demonstrates how wrong our own family could be in their sheltered mindsets unless open to do something else. A story mainly about understanding the time that we grow up and become our own individuals after being raised by our parents, and how our parents actually come to understand that point. Where in that sense, it is a very admirable story to tell, and one that remains to be a landmark in modern times. Belle is truly a character of her own, a highlight of those deemed weird by society for being into books and having an active imagination and independence unlike anything has ever been seen. Traits that all of us actually have and can actually relate to, wanting something that is more out of this provincial life, being more free than those who actually conform to the same standard. Hence why people like Gaston tried to chase her as the ultimate prize. How she acts independently to how she believes that is above the standard, like those supporting her father when most of his inventions fail, and how he actually believes in her. Really showcasing the love she has of family by willingly taking his place as the Beast's prisoner despite the horrible circumstances that actually comes with it mostly. And it's through that personality of compassion that the Beast actually manages to open up later in the story and actually starts to fall for her, while she is more slow and more on the side of seeing the human in him despite his scary exterior, and of course interacting with the servants that he has. She is just able to see the good and bad in people, comparing that with Gaston and Beast for who they are as people, when others actually see the same thing differently on the exterior side rather than the darker aspects of what they see inside. Her stubbornness to change to other people's definitions are what makes Belle a very good princess, choosing to stand up for what she believes in throughout, understanding herself better and those around her. And because of that, she is just generally a good character throughout, where no one else can actually deny that fact considering where the story is actually coming from, making the choices for the better or worse of who she actually comes into contact with. Rapunzel is the true definition of what a modern Disney princess is in terms of how most of the characters are quirky, and of course how the animated models that they actually use. Because when you look back on this recent era of Disney characters, they all look the same and have the same stars from Rapunzel herself, and it's not hard to see why, and why she is actually a fun character in that regard too. Her entire personality truly makes the film into its own, separate from the previous era of Disney into a new one with this focus that showcases of what this side can actually do. The perfect modern fairy tale adaptation, mind you, and one that explores the very interesting aspects like her being the actual daughter of the royals, but actually being raised by this wicked creepy old woman who stays young because of her hair, where because of those experiences, she has to be forced to live up in this tower, not being able to experience the beauty of the world except for the lanterns that come out every year that signified something greater about the beautifully strange world. Where coming into contact with Flynn, she uses that connection that opens her up to see her dream come true and the reality that actually comes with it, that understanding of what life actually brings to it with the love of humanity that can't be displayed, and also the wickedness of it with certain individuals like what Mother Gothel really is. And seeing that end with her real parents is truly the cherry on top for such an adventure, knowing where her life actually truly began. Where in its basic essence, Rapunzel represents the passion we have for life's greatest challenges and mysteries and optimism that should be shared for something greater rather than sheltered to one singular area. How freedom offers us new experiences and ideas to strive for, and if done right, a character's personality could be that could truly set the story off in its own direction. So for those aspects, we are all thankful that characters and princesses like her exist with their adorable, fun quirks, but also angry at the same time, the fact that Disney just loves them to put as relatable traits without any regards for their stories at all in future characters as well. But just honestly, for this one time, this one actually does work. Now, to be honest, you probably expected Moana to be up this high on this list considering how much I actually love her character as the best Disney protagonist ever created. But also surprised she isn't actually number 1 in that list, because to me, she actually isn't the best Disney princess for me in that matter. I mentioned this early on in the video because I disagree with the short-sighted definitions of what they actually find as princesses, and just found something more iconic to what actually fits a Disney princess, as we will see later on. But besides that, like I always say, she truly is the standout role model of what a Disney character is, with her fun short quirks, finding her true passions in life and using that for the better of her own people. How that passion can be her strength and ultimately completely or weakness at the same time, to saving the problems they all have in that journey represented through others like Maui. How everything she does is just more out of love rather than her own selfish desires like her father or what many of the others actually expect of her, and is just able to intelligently solve any problem they come into contact with using the resources that they have, which all contributes to the reason why the ocean actually chose her, because of the fact that she finds something others might not actually see in the first place. And in that regard, she also finds out who she is as a person who constantly struggles with her own self-doubt in between what she wants and what her people want and the legacy that actually came with it. But then again, actually coming all together when she knew that she was the only one who could define who she is as a person, able to bridge both the love of past and present together and to find their future together. Those of Maui, her parents, herself, where they all found it through the heart of it all, as most of us can actually learn to see. Her flaws and her strengths are just very real, as they do look good on the surface but also very consequential as a result, but manages to learn from each step to benefit everyone for the better because she knew what was actually good on the inside to begin with. I mean, I could go on and on about her, but I've already done that a couple times at this point, where it's just best to simplify it as such and why she truly is a great character in that regard. And the one princess who stands out above the rest and truly makes them into the icons we know and love today is of course Cinderella herself, because no other character has made quite the impact on Disney films in either animated or live action for that matter, or just in general with a character like her, managing to save the Disney company in the 50s to keep producing what we see today and salvaging such positive reception for other film departments. And I know many people don't really think of her much based on her original film like Snow White did, because that kind of focuses a little too much on the animal characters and whatnot, but I just see how much development they wanted to put in her, focusing on what one person can do if they actually set their minds to it despite their poor upbringing. She is just one of those characters that needs more spotlight because of who she is and what she stands out true that many overlook just being there for the prince, where it's just more about her own values as a person and what her parents actually taught her, as demonstrated in the live action remake as well. That she carries on such a kind, brave soul because that's what she personally believes in despite the circumstances, being raised under those like her evil stepmother and stepsisters after her father passed away, and how those sequels further elaborated on that part, that she earns these moments of the typical happy ending because of her persistence in the face of adverse situations that would drag anyone down, working in such poor situations like a poor maid or being sent away for good, never wavering from that point even if the situation presents something that could easily send her down the wrong path. And that bravery should truly be respected in all regards as an important lesson for someone who actually still showcases such independence and kindness with the optimism of a brighter future that is actually earned later in the film throughout the actions of her fairy godmother and the interests of the prince who sought the same love out of his dull life. So while it could be said that the original story could have offered something more, the hardworking ethics of our very character already demonstrates something that only the best could truly be offered in that regards of all Disney princesses or any Disney character. I mean, still, she isn't the greatest character they ever had, as I think some before her on this list are actually pretty much better than what she can actually offer at this point, but with who she is at that very moment in time and what was constantly built around her rather than destroying any point that was actually built up in any form, whether it be the sequels or the live action films that have butchered the others, then I really think it is justified to why she is the standout model that all of Disney has to offer. An overall great character that is actually hard to hate for who she stands and for who she is truly like. And with all of that out of the way, all of these Disney princesses, including the ones that I haven't mentioned, are all standouts in their own way that really makes the Disney stories unique in the best storytelling they have to offer, inspiring millions across the world to shape better lives for the future. Ones who would determine their own fate in the pursuit that dreams can actually come true and magic that still can be delivered no matter what situation life actually throws at all of us. And with that all said, I'm all done, so goodbye.